Hello, my name's Karen Burke. I'm a Gestalt psychotherapist here at the Manchester Institute of Psychotherapy, where I see individuals, couples and groups for both therapy and for supervision. And today my colleague Steffy Cooke is with me. And Steffy, would you like to talk about you?
Yes, I am also a psychotherapist here. I'm a transactionality psychotherapist, and I too work with couples, individuals and groups. But I'm also a trainer here at the Institute too, and I supervise. And today what we're going to talk about is symbiosis.
And in Gestalt psychotherapy we don't have the terminology of symbiosis. However, Stephanie is going to talk to us today about what it is and how we can recognise it, and some top tips for how to work with clients when you do recognise there is a symbiotic relationship forming.
Me and Karen.
Yes, yeah, the two of us will talk about that. That's right.
So I'll just explain briefly a little bit about what symbiosis is in terms of transaction analysis, and I'll try not to use any jargon. Simply it's this, that how we see symbiosis is when an adult goes into a symbiotic relationship. That's a way of being that's learned from early childhood generally. So therefore, when a child's little, what happens in the attachment relationship is the mother or the father in some way abandons that child emotionally, and in order to keep that relationship going, the child wants the relationship to be kept going. What they do is they decide they need to look after that parent, and it's generally because the parent isn't being adult, it's because they are actually being very childlike in their behaviour. So what happens in the relationship is the child ends up looking after the unmet needs of the parent. So it's a developmental issue that happens. So it's a fixated unmet need in the parent from their early childhood that gets played out unconsciously in the relationship. So child looks after parent, becomes the parent, and that's when the symbiosis begins.
And what we've been talking about earlier was the fact that it's quite ordinary that in different ways that we would maybe negotiate, because often that's what relationships about. However, when you're talking about a symbiosis, what's happening is that becomes the only way that person can actually learn and actually does relate to others.
Yeah.
By actually always trying to feed or meet that need of the other person's child in them.
Yeah, it's because their way of attachment has developed through that way. So they kind of have a blueprint of attaching, which is a symbiotic way of attaching. So as they get older, they'll repeat that pattern of attaching in their adult relationships.
In Gestalt, as I say, we don't have that terminology or that type of theory. The closest that would come, and that's interesting that I use the word closest, because we would talk about confluence. And the meaning for confluence, as far as the Gestaltist is concerned, is that merging with the other.
Yeah.
So you would get we always have fish on a Friday. We always, and it's never an I, it's always about the we.
Yeah.
And so with a confluent relationship, and again, there can be a really healthy part of actually being merged with the other, often in times of great, really high emotion. And that would be a healthy thing to do. However, to be merged with the other, where the sense of I is lost, and there is no sense of self-empowerment, of self-development or robustness without the other.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's maybe sort of theoretically different, and yet
the same.
Yes. And so often the blending of psychotherapy is very, very similar.
Transactionality has got some of its roots in Gestalt, so that would really make sense. Because what you're saying is the symbiotic relationship is set up, because that's the way that that child has learnt to exist, because they fear in the abandonment or the rejection or the lack of connectivity that somehow something terrible will happen, and they'll either be abandoned, or even in some cases fear being killed or the other being killed or
Yes.
dying.
Yeah. So, as a therapist, what are you likely to see? What would make you think, aha, something's happening here? This symbiosis, or there's being a pull for you to be drawn into a symbiotic relationship. What would you see?
Well, it can sometimes be really subtle, and you don't know you're doing it till you're pulled in, like you said.
Yeah.
So what you might see is that the client in front of you accessing not a kind of grown-up here and now state. They'd be more very childlike, and would be inviting you. You can feel this kind of pull to want to take care of them or parent them in some way.
So advise them, but also maybe you might want to. They might be asking you for advice rather than them taking responsibility themselves.
Yeah, or they might appear helpless, and you might feel that part of you in the transference wanting to be their parent. In their with their helplessness. And they might say something like, you're the only one that really gets me.
So in flattering the therapist, then they're more likely then to respond.
And if you suss that out and you're really attuned to that, sometimes it's quite useful for you to kind of go along with it. And sometimes it's important for you to bring that into their awareness.
So, what would you suggest for other practitioners to work with the symbiotic relationship, or for someone who comes to see you who lives their life that way, trying to draw other people into a symbiotic relationship?
Well, of course, if they have lived their life doing that, they have an investment in keeping that going.
Absolutely, because they've managed so far. It's worked for them.
But generally people come into therapy because it's not working for them anymore. And so you have a foot in the door there. So generally, if you begin to recognise they have a symbiotic way of attaching, you can contract for the work for them to unpick what that means for them and what that's about. So they begin to become more aware of how, instead of it being self-serving and working for them, how it doesn't work for them. Because after all, they've come because they're unhappy and they want to change that. So that's motivation usually for them to want to do something about it. And because I'm a transaction analysis psychotherapist, I tend to contract with them about how that work is. So
could you give me an example?
First of all, obviously, making an alliance is really important, because unless you have that relationship with that person, they're not going to be able to withstand some of the gentle confrontations that you might have to come up with, in terms of, did you realise that you've said that 4 times now about that person, etc., etc. Or do you always have to wear the same clothes as your partner wears, etc. To build a relationship is important, first of all, and then to contract for the work. What is it you want to change? Because generally people want to change something, and if you've got their agreement about finding out why they do things, and how that feeds their symbiosis, then they're more likely to want to change that.
No, that makes real sense.
So the beginning part of the process is the most essential, because what comes after isn't going to be so difficult. So it's the beginning part of this. People who are invested in a symbiotic relationship are invested for a very good reason, because it helps them be who they are. So helping them understand that is the first part of the process. And helping them recognise that actually they can exist without it is the next part of the process. And really that's about our relationship, isn't it? I'm sure, as a Gestalt psychotherapist, it is all about working with the transference.
Absolutely, yes. It's about working in the here and now, and the words generally we would use is about raising awareness. So it would be when those small things come in that you would say to them, and I'm aware as you do that, I feel pulled to do in response.
Yeah.
Because often it will be out of clients' awareness, and they would think, well, I hadn't realised that actually that's what I was doing, or that's what maybe was happening for you as I did that. And often I find when working with this group of clients is that the feeling of empowerment, of doing it differently, and it can be almost quite heady for them, because it's quite exciting to actually choose to do it differently.
Yeah, because that's what essentially getting out of the symbiosis is about, really, isn't it? It's about owning your own power instead of giving it over to the other.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah. So, I'm aware that it's a bit cold in here, Steffi. Are you cold?
Yeah, I'm cold.
Oh,
I'm really, really cold.
Let me go and get you something
thank you. I really appreciate that.
That's okay. Here you go.
Yeah,
here.
Thank you.
Now, don't you feel better that I've done that for you?
Yeah, I do. I feel so much better.
Good.
Good example of a symbiotic invitation.
Thanks very much indeed. Speak again soon.
Bye.